WordPress is still around and actually very popular still, but can you actually also use that for a Next.js website? And the answer is yes, actually. So here I have a blog, and on the posts page, I am actually listing some posts that I am managing here from my WordPress dashboard, right? So you can see I have 3 posts, right? Another post, wonderful blog post, and the initial hello world. And that's exactly what I see here. If I click on the second one here, I can even view the content of that post, which I can also edit and let me show you that here as well. Here I can edit this whole post and I can hook into that here right in my Next.js website. So that's what we're going to take a look at in this video. And we need to host our WordPress on some server. So that's what we're going to use Cloudways for. Cloudways is today's sponsor, and they are actually a DigitalOcean company, and they make it very easy for you to host a WordPress server. So I'll show you exactly how to connect your Next.js app to WordPress, as well as making sure that WordPress is hosted on a server from Cloudways. Cloudways offers you many benefits of hosting with them. I'll show you exactly what all of those benefits are. But you can see here I have one server and I can host multiple applications actually on that server. We're just going to have one, but this app is what I'm using here. And Cloudways is also today's sponsor. And by the way, to get a good deal on Cloudways, make sure you check out the link in the description. Okay, so I added a link there. So if you want to sign up for Cloudways, you can use that link. Now here in the Next.js app, we're gonna look at how you can make sure that it's also statically generated, right? So that the HTML of every post is already pre-generated. Static site generation is the fancy word. And I'll show you how to revalidate that cache or that pre-generated HTML as well. Because, you know, we could change something about this post. When we change something, we wanna make sure that we bust the cache. ISR or on-demand revalidation, how does that work in a modern Next.js app? All right, so let's actually start from absolute scratch. I'm gonna remove all of the things that I set up here. Okay, so I just removed everything starting from a clean slate here. So I just have a very simple boilerplate blog site here in Next.js. I only have the home page right now, so let me quickly show you how that is structured. So in Next.js, in the app router, we have the page.tsx file in the root of the app folder. So that means it's going to be the home page. And I just have an h1 with a paragraph with some random text. Okay. And I have some styling here. So for example, the width here is a bit restricted. I have a header here and a footer as well. I have structured that as follows here in the layout file. So you can see all the pages are sandwiched between this header and footer, and they are in turn sandwiched in a container, which restricts the width. So in the header, we're going to have our nav links. I define them here up top and then we map over them below there. So right now I just have the home page, right? Now this is a blog, or it's supposed to be a blog, right? So we want to have some posts. So let's create a posts page, right? We can say something like this. If I save here, you can see I now have posts. If I click on posts, we're not going to see anything because we don't have a posts page here yet. So let me quickly add a posts page, right? So here in the Next.js app router, you create a folder and then you create another page.tsx. And then here we can define our posts page. Now, if I go back, you can see I have posts page right here. And what we want here is actually just an H1 with all posts and then a list of all the posts that we have. Now, we don't have any posts yet. So let's do something about that. Let's actually set up a WordPress instance where we're going to manage all of our content. Now, we need to find a place to host that WordPress server. We're going to use Cloudways for that. So check out the link in the description if you want to sign up. Let me show you all of the benefits that we get here from Cloudways. So Cloudways has apps and servers. So I'm going to start off here by creating one server, and I can host multiple apps on a server if I want. We're just going to do one here, but it starts off by just picking a server. So here I can pick the application. Right, so Cloudways is optimized for PHP type of applications. So you can see here out of the box, I can pick a configuration that I want. Also WooCommerce, also Laravel, Magento, but we're just going to go with a typical WordPress version here. I'm just going to go this one. We're going to say YouTube app, right, YouTube server. I already created a project from the previous example, so I'm just going to leave it like that. All right, so then we can pick which server provider we want to use. So remember, Cloudways is actually a DigitalOcean company. So by default here we have DigitalOcean, but if you want, you can also pick Vultr, Linode, Amazon, or Google. I'm just going to go with DigitalOcean here. We can pick how big we want the server to be. I'm just gonna go with 2 gigabytes, and the location, I'm gonna leave it at New York. Okay, so I'm gonna launch this, and Cloudways is gonna set up my server. I just have to wait a couple minutes, right? So Cloudways in turn is going to use a DigitalOcean server in this case. And as you'll see, it's gonna be very easy. It's managed hosting. We don't really have to think about a server. We get a bunch of benefits out of the box. All right, so after a couple minutes, it's finished. And now let's actually take a look here. Okay, so now we have a YouTube server, and we can SSH into that if we want. We're not gonna need that here. But what we also get is monitoring out of the box. We get some services here, some security and backup options here as well. But what we now also get is if we go to our dashboard, we now also have a WordPress application here under flexible apps. Let's actually take a look at that. So automatically we have this WordPress app already installed on that server now. So if I click on that, you can see we get a lot of things out of the box here as well, right? So this is as easy as it's gonna get setting up a WordPress server. We are getting our application URL right here, and I'm zoomed in here quite a bit. But this is our application right now running live on the internet, hosted by Cloudways, right? So you can see in the URL as well that this is a Cloudways URL, but this is our WordPress application, right? And we can log into the admin panel right here, right? So here we have the familiar WordPress login. Now we get the credentials here as well. So by default, it will just take your email, I think, right? And then here we also have a password automatically generated for us. So I can just log in here, and here I'm in my WordPress dashboard, right? So here I can manage my posts. So here you can see by default, it has created a hello world post, and that's what you're going to see on the WordPress website here as well. Now, of course, we don't want to have this UI or front end. We want to create our own UI or essentially app with Next.js, right? So we're not going to need this one, but we will use WordPress here to manage our content, right? All hosted by Cloudways. So let's see what else we're going to get here. So Cloudways offers you a staging environment here as well. Very helpful if you're making updates, you want to test before you push to production. We get monitoring here, analytics and logs of the app. It has some options here for bot protection, malware protection. You can manage your domain, and you get SSL certificate out of the box. Very helpful. And again, backup and restore here as well. So this is as easy as it's going to get in terms of hosting WordPress. You essentially get everything you need out of the box, and it's all managed for you. So, right, so here you get the access details and you're good to go, right? Even for the database here. And that's all that we're going to need to make this work, right? So now, of course, we have some posts here in WordPress, and we would like to display them here in our Next.js application. So how do we do that? Is that even possible? And the answer is yes, actually. So with WordPress, there is a REST API that we can hook into. It is technically also possible to set up a GraphQL plugin to use GraphQL in case you prefer that. Here, we're just going to use the built-in REST API. And I actually have a website that shows you exactly how all of that works. We can add authentication and things like that as well. But we're just going to use the JSON API that we get out of the box. So if we want to show all the posts here that are currently in WordPress, how do I do that? How do we do that? So remember, in Next.js, in the app router, we can just write here in the component, right? So here I can just make a fetch call. We can restore that in an environment called res for response. So which URL do we need to actually grab those posts from our WordPress instance here? Well, it's actually this application URL that we have right here in Cloudways. If I just paste that here, and let's actually make this HTTPS, right? And now we can say /, well, my Copilot actually already gives me a suggestion. So what you can actually do is you can use WordPress-JSON. Let me actually go there directly. I can just open a new tab and show you what we get. So yeah, WordPress-JSON will actually give you sort of like an index with all the endpoints that you can hook into. That's a little bit overwhelming, but what we can also do is tack on a little bit more WordPress version 2 and then posts to get all of the posts, right? So if I go here, you will see that we have one post with an ID of 1, and it has a title, right? Rendered hello world, and then it has its content right here. Welcome to WordPress, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we can simply make a fetch call to. So here we will get a response. Now we're going to get it in JSON data. So we're going to parse that from JSON into normal JavaScript. And then we have all of those posts. So then we can just map over them and create a link, let's say, right? So we want to have a bunch of links so that we can also view the details, right? So let's see what my Copilot can come up with. Yeah, so this is actually what we want. So we're going to take the data. It's going to be an array of posts. And for each post, we're going to create an LI and in there a link. And we will display the actual title of the post. So let's actually see what we get. If I do that, you can see I'm getting one post here, which is saying hello world. Now, if I click on this, let me zoom in a little bit. If I click on this, you can see we're using its slug, right? So here in the world of blogs, it's more typical to have a slug in the URL. So you get like a pretty URL instead of an ID. An ID would be some random number. We could use that as well, but typically for blogs, people tend to use a slug. So you get that as part of the data here, right? So we can just use post.slug as the href, right? So now we've proven essentially that we can get data from our WordPress instance. And now, of course, what we want is when you actually click on this link and you go to that URL with the slug in there, we want to see the content of that post, right? So how do we do that in Next.js? Well, here we have posts. And then if you want to hook into whatever is in the URL, we can create another folder in there. We can use square brackets, right? So this is a dynamic route, right? So then in there you have another page.tsx, and then here we have another page. So what do we want to do? So what do we want to add here? Well, we're just going to have an h1 here for the title. We want to show the title of the post and the actual content here, right? Now, this post, this one page will be used for all the posts, right? So here it's a dynamic route. So based on whatever is in the URL, whatever slug is in the URL, in this case, hello-world, we need to show the correct content. So we need to know which one is currently in the URL. So we get that here as a param. So here it's typed as a param with a slug in this case, because that's how we named it here as part of the folder. And so we will get a params.slug that we can hook into. So then here we need to make a fetch call to get all of the details for that particular blog post. Now you can see I'm getting a good suggestion here from Copilot. Let's actually accept that. So I'm going to make a fetch call here to the same URL as what we have here, right? Posts, right? The posts endpoint on our Cloudways server. But now with this query param, where we say we don't want all the posts, we only want the one with a particular slug. And so we will get some response. It's going to be in JSON again. So we're going to parse that. And then here we have our data. Now this will actually be an array. Now let me actually show you what we get if I just type it here in the address bar. So if we say slug is hello-world, we should get that one post that we have. Yeah, so here you can see I'm getting the details of that particular post. Now you can see it's actually an array because technically a slug does not have to be unique. So you could technically have multiple. If you were using an ID, if you were just trying to get one particular one by some ID, you would not get an array because an ID has to be unique. But here we get an array. So, okay, so this data will have the post, but remember it's an array. So here, if we want to display the title, we have to do data and then just take the first one from the array. And how it's structured is you can do title and then rendered. That's simply how it's structured. So then here you can see I'm getting the title of that particular blog post. And now I want to show the content here as well. So actually here what we can do is we can use this div and we can use its content rendered. So the content of the post will actually have a bunch of HTML that we can simply insert here on the page like this, right? So here it says dangerously set inner HTML. It has certain security aspects that you may want to look into, but this is essentially how we can actually get the actual content of the post here on the page, right? So this is basically how it's done. Now to clean it up a little bit, I would actually put the base URL here because we're going to make a bunch of fetch calls in an environment variable. Let's quickly do that. So I can say .env.local, and here we can do something like WordPress API URL, and then this is the URL that Cloudways gave us. So this is what we want to use instead of this whole long one. We can just write it like this. It's a bit cleaner. We do need to prepend process.env. So I think that looks a bit cleaner. Let's do the same here. Replace all of this with just this variable. Okay, so I think that's a little bit cleaner. Okay, so now if I go back to posts, everything is still working. Okay, so basically we now have a way of grabbing the data from our WordPress into our Next.js website. So let's actually try adding a new post. I'm going to say add a new post, right? I can manage all the content now here in WordPress. Wonderful post is a wonderful blog post. Right, I'm just gonna do a simple one here. I'm gonna publish this here. Okay, so now it's published. And if I go back to the dashboard, you can see I have another post there. right? So I can manage everything about my posts here. So now we want to know, of course, we can also see it here in our Next.js website. So if I go back to post now and if I refresh, you may actually not see the update immediately because Next.js does some caching behind the scenes. So what you may want to do sometimes is simply delete this .next folder and sometimes also restart the dev server, right? So I'm going to restart everything here and then I can refresh and let's see what we get. And now you can see I have another post here, wonderful post. If I click on that, you can see I also can see the content of that particular post. I also quickly want to mention static site generation. So for example, we want our pages to be pre-generated to HTML, right? Because that's optimal, right? So if we can already generate HTML out of this route, then whenever somebody comes to this URL, we can immediately give them the HTML. No need to compute anything. The HTML is already waiting for them, right? Static site generation is the fancy word for this. And let me actually show you how that looks like if we run a build. So here, if I run a build, I can simply do npm run build. And actually the build fails by default because I haven't typed that post that we got from WordPress. So if I go over here, yeah, you can see here the post here that we fetched is not typed properly, and by default the build will fail because of that. Now there is actually a package out there that will give you the types for the WordPress API, so that's something you may want to look into. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit here and I'm actually going to type it as any just to get rid of the error for now. Let's try the build again. So you can see a build is just creating an optimized version of the app, and one part of that is going to generate these static pages. So you can see the home page never changes, so we might as well just generate the HTML out of it. And we have /posts here. So /posts now is also now statically generated. So the HTML of this route is now ready to go, which is what we want, right? So the alternative is actually dynamic rendering. So here we can see a symbol for the slug route here, which means that when somebody's going to post /hello world, let's say, it has to compute that page on demand, right? Server rendered on demand. It has to create the HTML and then send that to the user, right? Which is not efficient. We already know that hello-world, we can already create the HTML of that route right now. And then when somebody goes there, we can just serve the HTML from a CDN, let's say. Right, so ideally, we want our routes to be static. Now, by default, if you have a dynamic route like here, it's not going to be static because it would have to create the HTML for that route right now. And it doesn't know how many slugs you could have. Technically, we could have millions of different slugs. So there is a solution actually here in Next.js, which is I can go to the individual post page. This one is dynamically rendered right now, but I can still generate some posts as static pages. For example, the top 100 most popular, or if you have a small set of posts, maybe just all of them. So I can export a function here called generateStaticParams. So here, what I can do is I just need to let Next.js know for which params, for which slug essentially, do I want to pre-generate those pages. What we can do is we can just get all of the posts from our WordPress instance during the build, and then here we know all of the slugs that we have. Now in our case, there's not going to be many, we only have 2 right now. So here what we're going to do is for each slug, and actually we can just leave it like this. So we have now all the post slugs. So we get all the data from our WordPress instance, we get all the posts, and we're just going to return an array here with an object. That's how it needs to be structured here, where we have slug and then the actual slug. So basically an array of all the slugs. So Next.js knows during the build which routes to actually pre-generate. So now if I run a build again, let's actually see what we get. Okay, so now we can see that all of the other ones are still statically generated, but now also this one, you can see there is some additional information here. It has found that there are 2 other posts, for wonderful post and hello world. Remember those 2 blog posts from our WordPress instance? They have now been pre-generated as well. So the HTML for those pages is already ready to go, which is optimal, right? So during request time, as requests are coming in, nothing else really has to be computed. The HTML of these pages are already good to go, which is an optimization. All right, so that's SSG. So now what will happen is if people go to this URL, the HTML is already good to go. It's already been cached in a way. It's been pre-generated. Now, what happens if we actually make a change here, right? So here we're managing our content. What if I actually need to change the content here? Maybe I made a typo. Maybe I want to add some additional information. Maybe I just want to add all these exclamation marks, right? So here I'm going to update it. I'm going to change the post. But remember, this has now already been pre-generated. So if the user will go here now, it will not be updated because the HTML has already been generated during the build. So what ideally what we want is also something called ISR, right, which is essentially on-demand revalidation. So essentially we want to bust the cache when there has been a change. So how would you do that? Well, typically this is something you do with webhooks. So there is a possibility in WordPress with plugins send you a webhook, right? So then there would be a webhook from your WordPress server to your Next.js app informing you that there has been a change in the content. So how do we set that up here in Next.js? Well, it's up to us actually, but commonly we can make this a route handler. So we can say API revalidate, and then here we have a route.ts file. And then in here, we're going to allow the WordPress server to send us a post request, right? So WordPress is going to send a post request to our Next.js server. And here we can take its body. Now, typically what you want to do is you want to make sure that it's actually WordPress, the WordPress server sending you a webhook and not just some random person, invoking the route handler. And then after that, you can use the revalidate path function from Next.js. You can see it's from Next cache. And you can say, well, for the /posts page, we want to revalidate that /posts page, right? Because if I change, for example, the title of one of these, this page needs to be regenerated, right? So /posts need to be revalidated. And then also an individual posts page, right? So it depends a bit on how exactly you want to revalidate which part of your app, but it would look something like this. You can use the revalidate path or revalidate tag, right? This is another way of doing it, right? So that is how you could build a blog or content website with WordPress, where you manage all of your content, and then Next.js that actually consumes all that content and displays it. Right, very powerful setup, especially in combination here with Cloudways, which makes it super easy for you to do all of the typical server things, so you don't have to worry about that. I also quickly here want to show you Cloudways Autonomous. So they have autonomous apps here as well. So here with Autonomous, they have even more advanced features for important websites of yours, which they have built on Kubernetes, which is actually a very powerful setup, which allows you to scale your WordPress site. And Cloudways also recently introduced what they call a new malware protection add-on powered by Immunify 360. So traditionally there are some issues with security plugins. So Cloudways now offers you this add-on. So that's also something that you may want to take a look at. I had a great time working with Cloudways so far, so I would say check them out. You can find a link in the description. I want to thank Cloudways for sponsoring this video. I hope this helps you with setting up Next.js with WordPress. I'm Wesley, by the way. I'm a brand ambassador for Kind, which is also a brand sponsorship. And I want to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.